You're a robotics founder that is coming out of engineering and design validation. After you're done congratulating your team, one of the key decisions you have to make next is figuring out the EE side of things, your electronic components, chips, PCBA. The environment is getting more complicated. There is regulations to consider, cost implications, supply chain constraints, tariffs are looming. Strait of Hormuz is blocked, impacting your lead time. How do you make sense of all of that when you should be focusing on designing for manufacturability, designing for testing, stability, scalability? You need a partner that has the experience to unblock a lot of these challenges. I'm talking to a guest who is unblocking challenges for robotics founders in Silicon Valley. Her name is Jennie Nguyen, CEO of PCB Tech. She's been taking on robotics in a big way. I'm interested to know what design decisions around EE should be made early, how to approach contract manufacturing, how to think about offshore production, PCBA, what does it cost? What countries, what factories, regulated product versus consumer electronics? What does the next 10, 15 years of robot building hold for us? I want to learn about all of that and more and bring you along on the journey. My name is Ali Afzal. This is Robot Builders Club. Let's dive into the world of PCBA and contract manufacturing with the queen of PCB. Let's dive in. All right, Jennie, what a pleasure to finally have you. Welcome to Robot Builders Club.
Pleasure and happy to be here.
You're looking amazing as always. So nice to have you. I want to start by, of course, introducing you. You're in the world of PCBA manufacturing. Your company is called PCB Tech. You're enabling not just robotics, consumer electronics across the board. You're the queen of PCBs and contract manufacturing. Is that an okay way to put it?
Thank you for putting it that way. Yeah, so just to put it really simply, anything that has an on and off button requires PCBs in it, and it could be the simplest PCB or it could be super expensive.
Got it.
So that's what
And
I build.
yeah, I want to understand, you could have chosen any part of manufacturing, any part of consumer electronics, robotics. Why PCB? Could you go into what is the story behind PCB Tech? How did you get there? And why focus on PCBs?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So my goal was to become a broadcast journalist a long time ago.
Okay.
They didn't pay the bills, so I had to take on a second job as a PCB inside salesperson. So I literally started from the bottom up. And after a few years of working with a couple of leading PCB manufacturers in the Silicon Valley, I opened up my own business, which is PCB Tech. And we've gone through a couple of iterations. But yeah, I did not choose to be in the industry. PCBs chose me because I guess I was good at sales and brought smiles to a lot of people and was able to deliver on PCBs and getting them to what customers need at the right price and the right delivery and everything. So that's always key in manufacturing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
And
chose me.
that's a wonderful thing. Rather than chasing something, if something is looking for you, why not go for that? Can you talk a little bit about what percentage of your interaction is within robotics, consumer electronics? How does the sales cycle work? What services you deliver? A little bit about your customer side of things.
Okay, definitely. So if we were to break my customer base into a pie, um, I would say about 50% of it is consumer electronics. And I could say that Apple is one of my top customers, and obviously they're consumer electronics. And then about 25% is telecom, data center related. And then the other is medical um, and robotics. Robotics is uh, I guess the least part of the pie because it's a new thing, robots being built and autonomous vehicles and things like that. So anything that is around robotics, that's kind of new. And so we're slowly ramping up to those types of customers. And of course, what do you define as robotics
I
in your
guess,
mind?
yeah, it's anything that is an intelligent machine that is moving either autonomously or is doing an automation type of task, whether you could have industrial robotics, which have been around for a long time. But I think the new shift is in the consumer side of things, the new trends of humanoids and enabling autonomy for self-driving cars. They require PCBs, right? So it's a broad definition, whether it's robotics or robotics adjacent. I guess you're not differentiating per se. You're not focusing on one vertical, which is great. It sounds like historically Apple was your main customer, and you've grown with so many robotics companies coming up, even in the Bay Area where we are. Seems like you're gonna have more work than know how to deliver, in
Right,
the
right.
PCB realm. So it's a massive opportunity there. Tell me a little bit about, for your PCBA, what services do you provide? Is it design? Is it testing? Is it actually getting that manufactured overseas? All the
Mhm.
different areas.
Yeah, sure. So PCB Tech is a VAR, so a value added reseller. That means that we don't own any factories, but we partner with factories. And therefore, we have factories globally in about 8 different locations. Those locations include USA, of course, Vietnam, China, Mexico, and Malaysia. So that's where we build most of our stuff. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, another part is Philippines. So we build all of our products and our customers' products in those locations. The services we provide are turnkey. So because we're a VAR, that means we have a lot of vast different, I guess, resources. So that includes engineering. We can design a board for you. We can lay out a PCB. We can buy the components, and we're really good at buying, hard to procure components because of all of our global resources and outreach in the supply chain. We could build cables and connectors, and then finally we can assemble it. So we take all of the components of a PCB, and then we're able to assemble it onto the PCB. And then that in that respect, we're building everything turnkey for you, from procuring all the components to the contract manufacturing of the board level PCB itself. So that's our niche in the market.
And what level of product maturity, at what point does the customer engage you? At what point in their product development, typically?
Typically, a lot of customers don't come to us for engineering, even though that is something that we can help with. Typically, customers come to me when they are in the early design stages. So, when they are not complete with their full device design yet, but they want to have a prototype of a bare PCB, for example, they'll say, "Hey, Jen, we're a startup. Can you help us build this PCB? And then can
Hmm.
you also help us with the components?" And then they find out that we can do other um, services for them, and we can offer other products. So it keeps adding on and on. But usually at the beginning stages, if a customer is a startup that is building a device or a humanoid or drones, then they come to us during that stage. And then we can bring them all the way up to mass production, which is, sometimes a couple of years out, if all goes well.
Gotcha. And I've been in environments where early on in the product development cycle, I've seen electrical engineers have the breadboard, how they're doing testing. And once they figure out what exactly is the design, they want to move over to a actual PCBA. That's what you're talking about. The engineer has figured out this is what they want out of the PCBA, performance wise, design wise, component wise, and then they go, "Hey, PCB Tech, this is what we have in mind. Help us get this manufactured in these quantities with a plan that once we scale, Jenny's going to be there to produce these in large numbers."
Yeah, definitely. So we can help at that stage as well. And so because our services are so vast, we can help through the entire supply chain of a hardware electronics device. Definitely.
Yeah, got it. And what would you say, is there anything unique about PCBA design for robotics versus consumer electronics?
Well, actually, everything kind of just merges and intersects. And so it's very similar. And so a design, let's say that you're a humanoid robotics
Hmm.
designer, you're still designing a PCB board. It could be very simple. It could be a more complex board. So it's all about the complexity of the design more so than what the industry or what board for what industry you're building, if that makes sense.
Hmm. It does. I think so. I've worked in um, consumer electronic side of things and also regulated environments as well. Robotics, right now where I am, surgical robotics, it's regulated. Our product life cycle is longer. It has the changes have to be tightly controlled, traceable, you know. So when you're working, you mentioned DoD, you mentioned robotics. How does regulated versus unregulated PCBA development differ? Do you see a difference? How do the two sides compare?
So, like a commercial board versus like a medical or a DoD
Right.
board
Yeah.
design, right? And so, specifically, if we're speaking about design, the designer obviously has that special capability to design for that specific, I guess, regulation if we're talking about DoD or medical. But we just design to certain standards. So, of course, as you know, the medical standard is ISO 13485, and then there's a lot of certifications that we have to follow if we're designing for DoD. So that could be AS 9100. It could be for ITAR, and there's a couple of other DoD standards and regulations that we have to build to that
What
I
is
don't
that?
remember off the top of my
Yeah.
head right now.
Yeah.
Other than those two.
So it's more you have to be certified as a manufacturer for you to be considered as a vendor. That's what you're referring to. You have to be aware and certified under those regulatory standards.
Exactly, yeah, and it's never, like, cut and dry like that. Sometimes, if a customer really wants to build us for, a number of reasons, they will wait for us to get that certification. Certification times are often very lengthy, though, 6 to 18 months and also very expensive. Sometimes the cost is 25,000 to upwards of 200,000 to get a certification, so it just depends, on the situation, but there's a lot of variances to those types of situations. But yes, if you're building prototype, then you have to have those certifications already set in place for the company to come and build with you. So for example, let's say I was going to build a board for J&J, which is your company, right? We'd have to have that ISO 13485 in advance. And we'd have to have that experience because it's just too competitive to not have that. And for J&J to go to us, for example, they wouldn't go to us if we didn't have that. So there would be no reason because there's so many suppliers out there.
Right. Yeah. The competitive environment, all of that makes sense. Let's go back to we're a robot builders club. There's a robot builder out there, a founder, early stage, has figured out what their robot wants to do, what vertical they want to operate in, form factor. They want to actually start producing it. Let's say it's for early pilots and early pilot deployment. How would that cycle work? How can you help this robot builder figure out the next steps for their robot from a PCBA and manufacturing standpoint?
They would tell us where they are in their process. We would ask if they need help with engineering and with the board design, if they already have that, which they typically do. We would start off with asking for Gerber files, which is the
Mm,
files that are needed in order to build a bare board, whether it be a rigid board or a flex board or a rigid flex board. So those are the types of boards that we can make. And then after that, we'd ask for the bill of materials, the BOM, basically, so that we can get an estimate on what the cost of the components itself would be. And then from the Gerber file and the BOM, we would then be able to give them a price, a full turnkey price on their device.
got it. Are you able to give me an idea of what we're talking about, ballpark in terms of cost, what it runs? I know it's a hypothetical question, but just an understanding for a founder, how much should they be dedicating towards the PCBA side of things?
Yeah, most people are reluctant to answer questions about pricing, but I kind of know
Yeah.
that off the top of my head and in my sleep. So I can definitely tell you and give you a ballpark. So, for example, an autonomous vehicle company that I sell boards to, and I can't mention their name because of NDA restrictions, but one of their boards, and this is in production, meaning they're building 300,000 pieces per year, because that's how many
Mm,
cars they're making. It costs about $9 for one board at at the 300,000 quantity. But now, let me tell you something very interesting. For every autonomous vehicle or electric vehicle per, let's say you see a Waymo driving out there,
yeah,
each car has anywhere from 80 to 125 PCBs in there.
yeah.
So if you just did the math, $9 times 100 boards, for example, it's the cost of building a car in that respect is very expensive.
Yeah, and that's the bare PCB, right?
That is that is the bare PCB with the components on it times
Uh,
100, right? So
That's
$9,
PCBA. It's an
that's
assembled
PCBA.
PCA.
Yes,
Wow,
complete
that's cheaper
PCBA.
than I would have thought. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't know the cost side of things in that world. And
But
what
wait,
yeah,
because PCBs vary hugely across the board, no pun intended, because, that could be a simple one with a sensor on it. And then what if it's a different board that is for the
yeah,
infotainment part of the car, for example, or the seat. So it all varies, but
of course.
I'm speaking specifically to this one board that I had in mind that I'm currently building at that 300,000. So it varies a lot, but that's just ballpark for one board that I'm building
Got
right
it.
now.
Understood. Thank you for sharing. And can I be as bold as to ask what is the margin for somebody like PCB Tech in that space?
My margins for production level boards, meaning boards that are in production and it doesn't require a lot of hand holding, designs are done and we're just making boards
Yeah,
so that the EV maker or the autonomous maker can put in the cars and sell it, right?
yeah.
And the cars, go into the field and they're on the streets. So in mass production, obviously the profit margins are lower. I expect anywhere from 3 to 20% profit margin.
Gotcha.
So
That's yeah.
sometimes we make a lot of money and then sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
Just depends.
Like with anything, what would you say is the most expensive manufacturing or PCBA mistake that you see with founders that could have been easily avoided had they contacted somebody with your expertise?
That also varies, but I would say if we built the wrong version, for example, or if somebody sent us the wrong version and they meant to send a different version, that would be
Mm.
the easiest way to screw up and lose a lot of money, right? During a
Hmm.
build. But that usually only occurs during, the prototype level. So
Yeah, no, I've understood. But what I'm trying to get at is what can is the value of them using you? What can they avoid rather than a company trying to build a PCBA themselves? What cost are they avoiding? Are they getting your scale and because you're connected offshore and you have sourcing? I'm trying to understand.
Mm, the value that I bring is a lot. I go around and I tell people that I can guarantee a savings off of their BOM, and that's
Mm,
because I have about 20 years of experience and resources, the whole entire global supply chain of hardware electronics manufacturing. So I know where to put that build based on the design. I know which geographic location is best for that type
mm,
of industry, whether it be the humanoid or whether it be the EV. I know which factory to go to so that there's no guesswork. Customers aren't running around the globe trying to source, is Philippines better to build EVs? Is Vietnam better to build EVs? So I just get straight to the point and save a lot of time in that respect. And then I know how to
sure.
save money too. Thirdly, because of the amount of volume that I have, I get even lower pricing than if the customer were to go direct to that specific factory,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
So
So the volume that I send to
relationship, yeah.
each factory individually is higher than if one customer were to go there but on their own.
Gotcha. So no, that's very interesting that you've built over 20 years. Of course, you've unpacked something that a newcomer into the market can totally benefit from, the scale of manufacturing and the relationships you've built in all of these regions. Can you, for my understanding and for others, can you unpack what are the different companies or factories or countries good at? You were mentioning go to Philippines for certain things, go to Vietnam for certain things. What is happening offshore? What is the ecosystem looking like? Which country is better at what particular space? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Overall, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but overall, China is my pick for building PCBs and PCBAs. But because of the non-China initiative that the US, for the
Hmm.
most part, has, we build cars in Philippines because they already have the certification. Building cars obviously is a very complex process that is very heavy with documentation and regulation.
Right.
And my specific Filipino factory has all of that in place and has had all of that. So they're very mature and sophisticated in that automotive supply chain. When it comes to building for consumer, Vietnam is pretty good. And of course, this is all if we're not considering China at all, right? Vietnam is very good at building consumer um, because the prices are lower.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it just all
Because
depends.
China, sorry, I was just going to say China, because of regulatory reasons and political reasons, we're moving into other countries. And also, Chinese labor in the recent years is going up. Chinese cost, a landed cost is going up too, right? That's also part of it.
Right, you're exactly right about that. So labor in Vietnam is cheaper and it's easier to move things along and lowering tariffs and actually easier to even ship from Vietnam as well than from China
Because of the paperwork
because
requirements.
of the paperwork and the geopolitical issues. And when I say geopolitical issues, I mean, even if China is shipping a box out for me, for example, right? It meets with a lot more scrutiny during the shipping process, during the customs and borders process, than, say, if a box from Vietnam was coming into the US. So that's what I mean by that.
Got it. Yeah, something to consider, especially if you're on tight timeline. You want to get your supply chain and product materials stateside quickly. Yeah, so those are the considerations somebody would have to think about. What about the growing manufacturing movement in the United States itself? Do you
Mm.
see a shift of manufacturing for high value PCBs maybe here? Could you talk a little bit about domestic production?
Yeah, so high value PCBs is one thing, building for governments is another. Companies that have an initiative and can spend a little bit more money and say, hey, I want to be a made in the USA product. So those
Mm,
are the reasons why manufacturing would happen in the
mhm.
US. So, yeah, there's a lot of movement to build in the USA. I think at some point, whether it be 2 years from now or 5 years from now, the manufacturing capacity in the US will be very full because of all of those reasons that we mentioned, the geopolitical, the tariffs, the non-China aspect, and not getting it quickly enough from other countries like Vietnam or Philippines, for example, because of shipping time or whatever. So, yeah, there's a lot of movement for boards to be made in the USA, especially with government-related boards.
DoD, yeah. And you're saying it's going to continue to scale. How about the quality side of thing and the cost side of thing? Will we stay competitive?
I don't think so. We're never gonna be competitive to Asia manufacturing, and that's a fact, and I can say that with 100% confidence. US pricing, whether it be for the PCB or for the entire PCBA build itself, is always anywhere from 3 to 6 times more.
Wow. And what
So
is yeah.
everyone can say, "Oh, yeah, we wanna build in the US," but realistically, once they see the quote, they're like, "Oh, never mind. Let's look
Mm,
at other countries."
yeah, that's why you would probably build F5s here, but not the iPhone here, right?
And not only that, we build most of the parts of F-35s in the US, and then sometimes there's a little leeway where you can get this part and that part offshores.
Yeah. And on that note of outsourcing for a founder, for a company that's building a product, when does it make sense to outsource manufacturing outside of the company? And when does it make sense to grow that capability in house for that company?
So far as manufacturing, doesn't make sense to ever build inside a company because there's a lot of capital investment that is required to buy machines. So if we're just talking PCBs, definitely nobody makes their own PCBs and unless it's a really simple one. I find even startups in Silicon Valley can't do that on their own, even though they have a factory or they're in an office that can have manufacturability. It's just too intensive to buy a
Mm,
PCB machine. You can assemble some parts on
yeah.
your own. That's not wise either because these days most parts are so small that they require SMT, which is a robotic type of assembly. If the audience isn't familiar with SMT and assembly,
Surface mount technology.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah, because like to your point, capital intensive, being
Yeah,
able to put components on the board. You could maybe solder in limited quantities
exactly.
yourself, but at scale, you need the big guys that are doing it in large numbers.
Not only at scale, but most components these days, it requires SMT because it's just too small to handle.
And have you ever turned down a client because their product wasn't manufacturable?
I wouldn't say I turned them down, but I
Mhm.
helped them to get to manufacturability.
The DFX side of things, right? What does that entail in the PCBA world?
I think you mean DFM, which is designed for
Hmm.
manufacturing.
Yeah.
So if we're just fabbing a board, for example, we take the Gerber file and then we would perform the CAD, which is the analysis of the board itself. We would look at how we would be able to manufacture it that fits into our machines. And then if it doesn't, for whatever reason, we'd go back and say, hey, can we modify it to this or are you able to accept that? And so during that CAD process, there's a lot of questions that go back and forth sometimes, especially on more complex boards. And then we were able to work it out to be able to finally manufacture it for the customer. So yeah, we try not
Yeah.
to turn the customers away
Yeah.
because this is hard.
Right. I guess DFM is one side of things. The other piece that I was interested to get an understanding was the testability, designing it for the board to be testable, especially for complex electronics like robotics or even, yeah, car as well. You have so many different boards, and each board may require a different test, may require a different fixture. Do you get involved in helping the companies figure out testing requirements, testing fixtures, that side of things?
Definitely. If a customer asks us to help them to design their board towards a certain testing spec, then we
Mm,
can definitely help them with that. Otherwise, we pretty much can provide any type of testing capability that a customer can ask for. And usually with tests, we would ask for their firmware or even their hardware so that we could take that and use that to perform the testing for them. And that there's many different types of testing, of course, but the one I was just referring to is something called a functionality test, and so it's pretty basic test that is performed after a PCB is completed.
each board gets tested?
Most of the time, yeah. It depends, but most of the time each board gets tested. If customer is in a hurry, then we'll choose a random lot and test that way. Sometimes we'll test all of it. And so there's many different types of tests that occur. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to test a board. Sometimes it takes up to 5 minutes. So it all ranges widely.
Got it. So you must be traveling a lot, right? Are you going to different countries? Personally, what does your working model look like?
So, being that I've been in the industry for about 20 years now, I've been all over Asia, of course. I've also been to Mexico and Philippines to not only just to qualify the factory along with my engineers, but we've also gone there to build relationships with the factory principals because that's really important because once a production occurs, we want to make sure that everybody is in line and everybody gets along well. So the human side of it, right?
Mm,
Just the quality side, but also the human side. So I've literally spent about 50% of my initial part of my career in China and Vietnam and Malaysia. And I actually lived in Vietnam for a few months out of the year for the past few years because I was bringing up that, the
mm,
EV customer. Lots of
got
traveling.
it. We've talked a lot about the core value proposition for your company, PCB Tech. We've talked about the state of PCB manufacturing, how founders can utilize you, what value you bring, how to actually make the boards, make them manufacturable, testable, all of that stuff. So thank you for sharing all of that cost side of things too. So we've covered a lot of ground. I want to
Mhm.
take a step back and learn more about Jennie. And I want to learn more about the why behind what you're doing. Let's help me understand, where do you see PCB Tech going? What's your grand vision? Is there a grand vision that you have?
I, have had the same grand vision for a long time and throughout most of my career, and that grand vision is, of course, to create wealth and to make a name for myself. I came from Vietnam, and I didn't really have anything, and my parents didn't really, I guess, direct me in a certain way, so I had to find my own path, and so I'm always looking to create something big, be wealthy, create, jobs for other people, but, it's interesting recently, I've kind of thought about what I'm doing and I want to create impact. I want to, have more people know about my industry. When I go and I answer questions about what I do, nobody really knows what PCBs are. Yes, it is kind of like the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to electronics and technology, but it is very necessary. And I want girls to be in this industry because I do want to create impact now that
Yeah.
I'm further into my career and getting older, I wanna help other people. So every
Older. What are
time
you
I
talking
hire
about? You're
yeah,
you're super young.
thanks. Every time I hire someone, it just feels really good. So now I'm more about impact and spreading knowledge and helping others.
Hmm. That's very interesting that you mentioned how you started off with creating a living for yourself. Once you have a certain level of stability, your move into impact side of things. I forget who said it, but I think about this particular anecdote quite a bit, that there's three parts of your life that you can break up. First part of your life, you learn. Second part of your life, you earn. Third part of your life, you return. Learn, earn, return, right? And it's not that it is you completely move from one stage to another. There's overlaps, but it's basically, as you go through these stages, you're doing more returning and less focus on earning. So that jives with what you're saying. Where
Yeah, but then
would
but then I just really aged myself. But yes,
yeah,
let's agree that yes, there is a lot of overlap. So yeah.
but sounds like you want your focus is slowly going into the returning side of things, to the impact. How can you create impact? I want to unpack another thing that you mentioned, being a woman in the industry, and for other girls to be, other ladies to be involved. Do you think it is with your experience, what you have seen, has it been a barrier or an asset to be a smart woman in this particular field, which is male dominated for most part?
Yeah. So I'm going to get into kind of a tough topic. It's kind of difficult to be a woman in this field where it's 90% men. All the conventions that I go to, it's 90 to 95% men. I would
Yeah.
say more closer to 95%. And then in my field it's also about 95%. So it's easy because, you know, I'll catch, a guy's eye, for example, and I'll immediately get the opportunity to speak to them and open the doors, right? But then it's also hard because I have to balance being a woman. Sometimes I'm not taken seriously. Sometimes they'll just want to talk to me or go on a date, and that's,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
also a very difficult balancing act. So, yeah, so it's a tough thing for me to do a lot, so
Opens the door
it's not
potentially to,
easy, yeah.
yeah, but then you have those potential mixed
Just
intentions from the person. Are they interested in
uncomfortable
my business,
situations, yeah,
or are they trying to make an advance? They want to date or something?
correct.
Yeah, that mixed bag. Yeah, I can totally see that. What would you say if we go down for in the same vein, male dominated field, what advice would you have for women roboticists or women founders, tech founders going in? Because it's Silicon Valley's very bro culture, at least in the popular media, right? That it's very broy and Zuckerberg and all of the guys have been male. Somebody that's in STEM field, a woman that's trying to launch a startup, what advice would you have for them, or what perspective would you have for ladies trying to enter this space?
So, ladies entering the space, if they're already engineers, they already have an advantage because they can talk the talk and they're smart and technical at the same time. So, those women can pretty much hold their own. Just use your education, use your knowledge, and grow with whatever opportunity you have. For non-technical people, like how I started, in sales, I would say, you know, talk to yourself and see, is this the right choice for me? If I were met with uncomfortable situations, what would I do? In that situation, how would I solve it? How would I still be able to take advantage of that opportunity? So sit with
Hmm.
yourself and talk about, is this the right career path? If I were to face different challenges socially amongst men, how would I handle it? And what is my threshold for those situations? So that's what I would do.
Yeah, makes
It's
sense.
pretty
There's a lot
tricky.
of, yeah, I can only imagine, right? I'm on the majority side,
On the other end.
the other side of things, but it's very true. Even in the companies that I've been in Silicon Valley, whether that's Cisco or startups or J&J, it's mostly dudes, right? So it's a mixed bag, like you said. There might be an opportunity where you can stand out, and right now in the world, if you can stand out, that opens new doors for you. But there's additional challenges being a woman, right? So let me expand the entry point for somebody who's trying to break into tech. There's a lot of new graduates that are finding in the current environment, finding it hard to land jobs, to break into tech, to break into robotics. I get contacted by a lot of people that are exiting master's programs and they're looking for a co-op position, right? Because it's the market is for the longest time, tech was there's a lot of opportunity, but right now it's harder to get in. From your perspective, from the conversations you're having, from what you're seeing in the industry, whether that's Silicon Valley and elsewhere, if there's somebody trying to enter tech, what skills would you say that are in demand right now?
So it would depend on what position they're applying for. Is it a technical position? Is it in engineering, or is it a sales or program management position?
Maybe within robotics, right? Like it's being an engineer was a safe bet in past that you're an electrical engineer, you're you're gonna find an entry level position at Google or Apple. That is no longer a guarantee. So let's say you're a technical person, an engineer, and you're trying to land into robotics because robotics or physical AI, a lot of growth happening in that space. A lot of companies are there.
Definitely.
But how can you stand out? How can you land your first job? I want to know if you have a perspective on that.
Just brush up on AI knowledge, talk AI all day long, and you'll get somewhere. Know the full scope of what's going on with AI. How's the agentic flows? How are people getting to know AI? Because AI is a thing where it's kind of like a mystery still. Everyone talks about it, but does everyone really know how it's applied? How do you go make that presentation using AI? So you got to have to know about AI and really get into the weeds about it.
That's good advice. If we bring the conversation to your company, when you're bringing on somebody, if you're hiring or whether you're establishing a partner in the industry, what are you looking for? What signals competence for you?
For my company, for PCB Tech, I would look for somebody that knows tech in general, knows geopolitical issues because we are a global company that has many different global locations in different countries. Somebody that is well spoken, that knows what is going on with AI and why it's such huge growth, and for them to understand that AI means GPUs, it means data centers, and that is the largest growing and most profitable sector right now, industry. So even I myself am targeting new customers in that industry. And not only is it high profit margin, it's also high revenue, high gross revenue. So that's what we look for right now. And if I were to hire somebody, I would look for somebody that knows a lot of those different industries.
Makes sense. Have subject matter expertise, be personable, have, especially focusing on the sales side of things, know how to communicate, how to sell yourself. All of that does make sense. I want to talk a little bit about the supply chain side of things, the supply chain angle. The supply chain is getting, we started talking about it, it's getting complex from a geopolitical standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. Are you seeing companies designing their products differently now because of the regulation, because of the risk that is out there, war related? Strait of Hormuz is blocked. Well, it opened as of a few hours ago, but like, are you seeing companies operating differently and talking, thinking of risk differently and making different decisions on their product development?
Of course, everyone can feel the constraints of all the geopolitical. So, depending on what company you are and what you're making, definitely there's certain guidelines that you follow or think about when you're doing a design. So, for example, and the most important component of a design is, of course, the IC, right? So, who are we going to use for this design in for this particular IC? Is it ST Micro, who's an Italian company? Are we going to use Renesas, for example? They're a Japanese company, but where do they touch upon in their global supply chain? Or do we use a Taiwanese chip? So lots of those different thoughts, I'm sure, are in those engineers' minds when they're doing a design, and all the different constraints too.
Do you think that's a new thing in the sense that the engineers didn't have to think about those things, and now this is new? Now they have to consider those things.
Definitely, definitely anyone that's designing on producing any type of device in the last 10 years has had those thoughts in their minds. I would say that 15 years ago, it wasn't so much, and nobody
Mm,
really had to think about that. And it was a more carefree world. But yeah, it's been very constraining these days to the whole supply chain.
gotcha. And if you were designing, let's say, a robot today, if a founder is designing a robot today, how would they future proof their supply chain? How would they, what What do they need to do to make sure that they're not constrained by supply?
That's a difficult one because sometimes you just need a certain part number that is a constraint because the materials of that certain part number or the demand for that part number is so high that, everybody has to grab it and they have to be able to pay for it. So the deeper pockets you have, the more you can obtain that particular part, right? So again, it just depends.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, it's a tough question to answer. It's,
To
yeah,
hone in on, right? Yeah.
fair. What does the future of PCBA and manufacturing look like in the next 10 years?
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit. I think that customers in the US have the initiative to start buying more USA components and
Right.
definitely producing in the USA so that they could say, proudly made in America or proudly made in the
Mm.
USA. But again, that comes with a cost. So yes, I think that a lot of USA manufacturing is gonna come back, but only partially, and all the components that we can get in Asia, for example, we're still gonna do. But it's interesting, you can make 51% of a device in the USA, and then you can stamp it with the Made in the USA stamp, so that's interesting.
So you can get strategic about it. I wonder if that rule would also change once people get wiser. I guess the idea is it's a constantly changing environment, and it will continue to be. The complexity is only going up, and you need a partner to be able to make sense of it, which is why you're there, and which is
Which
why
is
PCBA Tech is in business and will continue to be, right?
Yeah, so we have vast knowledge of global supply chain, of how to make a PCB and how to make a PCBA. So yeah, that's definitely our superpower.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, we're approaching time. Before I let you go, let me switch into this mode that I've had at Robot Builders Club, which is a lightning round. Rather than give you very open-ended questions, I'm going to give you a short question that you need to answer in as few words as possible. And it's
Okay.
going to come at you really, really fast.
Okay.
You up for it?
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
let me take a breather.
Okay.
Okay, ready.
All right. In 3 words or less, tell me what is Jennie's superpower?
Understanding people, accommodation, and getting the job done right away. Shoot,
Love
that
it.
was that was 3 more words, sorry. You wanna
That's
start again?
fine. It
Okay.
needed more words to describe Jennie's superpower.
Okay.
You're technical, you're an integrator, you make things happen. Completely get it. What is the most overhyped trend in Silicon Valley today?
Physical AI.
If you could have a robot help you with your day to day, what would you want it to help you with?
Make the bed.
Yeah, why not? What do you think is the best thing about living in Silicon Valley?
Oh my gosh, it is so rich with network and money and companies and rich
Love
with
it.
tech.
What is the best thing about your job?
It's like not having to work.
You get to play. It's play for you. It's all of those things. Yeah, that's a great answer.
It's never been a job.
What do you think is the best thing about PCBA, working in PCBAs?
It's a sophisticated class of people, both sales and customers.
Love it. What does the future hold for Silicon Valley?
Immense explosion of growth.
So it's not a decline like you see in the media, you think?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I mean, we're biased. I think we live here. There's a reason why we're here. So yeah, no, I'm completely aligned with you. What is the best thing about Asia?
Best thing about Asia, of course, lower prices overall and environment.
Yeah. You get into a time machine. You travel to 2050. What does the world look like? What does the future look like?
Like the Jetsons, buzzing with VTOLs and self-driving everything, robots doing everything. That's what I see, just like the Jetsons.
Is it a positive future for most part?
Yes.
Awesome. No, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for sharing about your perspective, how the PCB world, unpacking that, how contract manufacturing works. We only had limited time getting to know you a little bit more. That's what I love about this format of podcasting, getting to connect with people and then sharing you and your knowledge and your world with the rest of the world, right? So it's been great. Hope to have you on another conversation in the next installment of it. I want to talk a little bit more about what we didn't get into, which is investment side of things and how your leadership side of things. So we'll keep this going.
Yeah. I really appreciate it and honored to be a part of your podcast.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much, Jennie.
Okay. Take care.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.